I stared at the empty space on the mantel where my wedding photo had stood for decades. My daughter-in-law said it didn't match the decor, so she threw it away. 51 years of love, gone with the garbage. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just waited. And when she came back the next morning, my son at her side, she saw it. The eviction notice, framed in the exact same spot. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The morning light slanted through the lace curtains, catching dust motes that spun lazily in the air, the kind of soft, golden glow that usually made Ginny Foster's living room look like a memory. But that morning, the light seemed to spotlight what wasn't there. The mantel looked wrong. Ginny froze halfway across the room, her hand still holding the dish rag from the sink. She squinted, tilting her head like the picture might reappear if she looked hard enough. The slight discoloration of the wall where the frame had rested, a pale rectangle of undisturbed paint, made her stomach drop. The photo was gone. Not just any photo. Their wedding photo. June of 1974. Standing in front of the Magnolia Street Chapel, her veil slightly crooked, Robert's grin crooked to match. She could still feel the humid air of that day, smell the salt and honeysuckle. That silver frame had held 49 years of their life together. And now, it was gone. She called down the hall, voice tight as piano wire. "Madison?" The answer came a few beats too late, floating from the other half of the duplex. "Yeah?" Ginny stepped through the doorway connecting their spaces, her slippers whispering on the hardwood. Madison stood at the kitchen island, all gloss and pastel, manicured nails, yoga pants, hair in a messy bun that had clearly taken effort. She was scrolling through her phone, iced coffee sweating beside her. Ginny nodded toward the mantel. "My wedding photo. Where is it?" Madison glanced up, blinked once, and then smiled with the kind of practiced nonchalance that could curdle milk. "Oh, that old picture? It was super faded. Kind of yellow. Honestly depressing. I thought you might want a more refreshed look in here." Ginny's voice sharpened. "Where is it?" Madison's shrug was almost theatrical. "Trash day was yesterday." For a moment, Ginny just stood there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between them. She felt something twist deep in her chest, not quite anger yet, but something colder. Something like a wire tightening. She turned without another word and walked out the front door. The air outside smelled faintly of rain and salt, the marshes whispering in the distance. The trash bins by the curb sat empty, lids tilted open like mockery. A sanitation truck rumbled 2 blocks away, its metallic jaws already grinding through someone else's forgotten things. Too late. She stared at the bins, her reflection warped in the glossy black plastic, and saw herself, 67, hair silvering, face lined not from time, but from endurance. Behind that reflection, she could almost see Robert smiling, patient, telling her to let it go. But the truth was, she couldn't. Not this time. She walked back inside, each step deliberate, as though testing the strength of the floor beneath her. Madison was still in the kitchen, oblivious, humming along to a pop song on her phone. "You threw away my wedding photo," Ginny said quietly. Madison didn't look up. "Ginny, it was clutter. You've got to learn to let the past breathe." Ginny's jaw tightened. The past is what breathes life into this house. Madison finally looked at her, a faint smirk tugging at her lip. "Well, maybe it's time this house exhaled." For a split second, Ginny imagined reaching across that marble counter and shaking sense into her. But instead, she folded the dish rag neatly, set it on the counter, and smiled, small and sharp. "Enjoy your morning, Madison." She turned, walked down the hallway to her side of the duplex, and closed the connecting door softly behind her. Inside, the silence pressed heavy. The mantel stared back, bare, accusing. On the wall above it, the ghost of the frame lingered in the shape of dust and memory. Ginny went to her desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a worn leather-bound journal. On the first clean page, she wrote the date. Then, in a slow, careful hand, Madison Foster removed my wedding photo from the mantel and discarded it without permission. She underlined the words twice. Outside, a breeze rattled the windows. Ginny's hand trembled just slightly before she steadied it. She closed the journal, set it beside the phone, and whispered to herself, "Some things don't get thrown away. They get remembered." Then she looked toward the empty mantel again, not with sadness this time, but calculation. Something in her expression shifted, a quiet spark lighting behind her eyes. The last frame Madison would ever touch in this house would not be one she could throw away. The next morning broke gray and low, the kind of Charleston morning that made the air feel heavier than it should. Ginny moved through the house like someone in a trance, quiet, deliberate. Every motion a small rebellion against the noise she'd endured next door for years. Her slippers whispered against the floor as she crossed to the cabinet built into the far wall of her study. She pressed her thumb against the latch, a habit from decades of keeping students out of locked drawers, and the door creaked open with a soft sigh. Inside, tucked behind a stack of old tax folders and insurance papers, sat a small red fireproof box. She carried it to her desk, setting it down like something sacred. The combination clicked beneath her fingers. The muscle memory of widowhood. Inside lay her most intimate proofs of a life. Robert's discharge papers, their marriage certificate, old bonds they'd once argued about cashing. Beneath those rested the folded deed to the property on Magnolia Street, both sides of the duplex included. Ginny smoothed the paper flat against the desk, tracing the embossed seal. Her name, only hers. For 6 years she'd told herself that letting Brian and Madison live on the other side rent-free was generosity, maybe even grace. But staring at the document now, she saw what it really was: indulgence. A mother's fear of losing the last piece of family she had left, and Madison had mistaken that for weakness. Ginny inhaled slowly, the weight of the air thick with a faint hint of lemon polish and the tide outside. She reached for her journal, the same one where she had recorded last night's insult, and opened to a new page. "This house," she wrote, "was built in 1928 by Samuel and Claire Foster. It was paid for in full by Robert Foster's life insurance. No mortgage, no liens, no room for arrogance." She set the pen down, feeling a strange clarity settle in. The anger had cooled overnight into something firmer, purpose shaped by memory. From the kitchen she could hear faint laughter through the adjoining wall. Madison's voice, bright, dismissive, mixing with Brian's low murmur. Probably some inside joke, some casual morning routine. Ginny stared at the connecting wall like she could see through it. She stood, filled the kettle, and waited for the whistle. The ritual steadied her: water, cup, saucer. Earl Grey, 1 sugar. Her husband used to call it her armor. The phone on the wall still had its coiled cord, a relic she'd never seen reason to replace. She dialed a number she hadn't used in months. "Clarence Monroe, attorney at law," came the voice, patient, worn smooth by years of courtroom civility. "Clarence," she said, her tone clipped but calm. "It's Ginny Foster." He chuckled softly. "Ginny, my favorite historian. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I'd like to discuss a tenant situation." There was a pause, just long enough for understanding to settle between them. "You're not talking about a stranger, are you?" "No," she said. "I'm talking about family. Or what's left of it." Clarence exhaled, a sound halfway between sympathy and approval. Do you have a lease in writing? Nothing formal, Ginny said. Just my name on the deed. All utilities, too. Well then, he said gently, you have options. All of them legal. The words landed like a lock clicking open. Ginny felt her throat tighten, not from fear, but from the relief of hearing validation spoken aloud. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't cruel. She was in control. Clarence continued, I'll draft a simple 30-day notice. You don't have to deliver it yet, but it'll be ready when you are. Thank you, Clarence, she said softly. And please, keep this between us. You know me, Ginny. I'm quieter than a church pew. They shared a faint chuckle before she hung up. The sound of the receiver settling in its cradle seemed to echo longer than it should have. Ginny sat for a moment, her teacup cooling beside the deed. Through the window, she could see the edge of the magnolia tree Robert planted on their first anniversary, its broad leaves glistening from last night's drizzle. Madison's laughter carried faintly through the open window, bright and careless. Ginny closed the fireproof box and slid it back into its cabinet, locking it with a soft click. Then she returned to the mantel, ran her fingers along the bare wood, and imagined a new frame. Something heavy, deliberate, unmissable. She didn't smile this time. Instead, she whispered, We'll see who gets to redecorate next. And somewhere, deep inside her, the plan began to take shape. Quiet, lawful, unstoppable. The afternoon light fell differently now, harsher somehow, like the house itself had lost patience. Ginny stood at the center of her living room, hands on her hips, scanning the space the way she used to evaluate her students' half-finished essays. Every corner told her the same story, revision without understanding. The first offense was small, but loud. The lace curtains that had belonged to her mother, gone. Replaced with something beige and soulless that Madison called minimalist. The room had been drained of its warmth, stripped of its past like an old photograph bleached by the sun. Ginny moved through the house slowly, her eyes cataloging absences. The framed photos that once lined the hallway, her and Robert at Niagara Falls, Brian at his high school graduation, were boxed and stacked in the guest closet, labeled MISC. Family stuff. A handmade quilt, stitched by Ginny's grandmother in 1941, was crammed in a plastic tub in the garage beneath half-used paint cans and a crate of holiday decorations that weren't even hers. She knelt to touch the quilt, fingers brushing the faint embroidered initials at the corner. CF. She could still remember her grandmother's voice explaining every fabric scrap's story. Her throat tightened as she folded the quilt neatly, shaking off the dust before setting it aside like a wounded thing. Upstairs, the spare bedroom looked more like a boutique showroom than a home. Madison had turned it into her content studio, white backdrop, ring light, an array of lip glosses and product boxes. The vanity was scattered with open makeup palettes, each one glimmering under artificial light. Ginny stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with quiet disbelief. On the dresser lay a small wooden box she didn't recognize. Hers, now painted over. She opened it gently and found Robert's military medals tossed in a tangle of paper clips and spare batteries. Her hand trembled. Unbelievable, she murmured, voice thin and dangerous. The phone rang downstairs, startling her. She let it ring twice before answering. Virginia Foster, she said, her old teacher's cadence returning by instinct. It's Marla, came the familiar voice, brisk and no nonsense. You sound like you found a crime scene. In a way, I have. Ginny leaned against the banister, glancing toward the guest room. Every trace of my life's been shoved into corners. My quilts, my husband's medals, even the curtains are gone. Marla snorted. That girl's nesting in your house like it's hers. Ginny's eyes hardened. Let her nest, she said, voice low. I'll show her what a real exit looks like. A pause. Then a slow laugh from Marla. That's my Ginny. I called Clarence yesterday, Ginny continued. He's drafting the paperwork. Good, Marla said. Make sure it's airtight. People like her don't leave quiet. Ginny looked out the window toward the other side of the duplex. Madison's SUV gleamed in the driveway like an unwelcome monument. Through the curtains, she could see her daughter-in-law posing in front of her phone, smiling wide, capturing a life that wasn't hers to display. She's turned my home into a backdrop, Ginny whispered. Even the walls feel embarrassed. Marla's voice softened. You're doing the right thing. You've given enough. When the call ended, Ginny set the receiver down with deliberate care, the way she used to close a gradebook after a failing exam. The house around her creaked with the settling of late afternoon, the old floors and beams sighing in sympathy. She returned to her study. On her desk sat a neat stack of folders: property records, tax receipts, maintenance bills, her evidence, her ammunition. She placed them in a manila envelope labeled Clarence Monroe. Confidential. Outside, the sun had begun to sink, casting long amber stripes across the walls. Ginny took one last slow walk through her house, pausing at every piece of history that had been hidden or mishandled. The faint scent of lavender polish lingered where Madison's synthetic candles used to overpower everything. It felt like the house itself was remembering who it belonged to. When she reached the mantel, Ginny stood still for a long time. The dust had been wiped clean, Madison's doing, but Ginny could still see the faint ring where her wedding frame once sat. She imagined replacing it with something new, not sentimental, not nostalgic, something final. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk. A text from Clarence. Draft complete. I'll bring it by tomorrow for your signature. Ginny's fingers hovered over the screen, then slowly typed back. Perfect. I'll be ready. She set the phone down, poured herself a small glass of sherry, and lifted it in the direction of the empty mantel. To Robert, she said quietly, and to taking back what's ours. Then, almost smiling, she added, frame by frame. The glass clinked softly against the wood, the sound crisp and deliberate, like the first gavel tap of a judgment already decided. By mid-morning, Charleston's humidity had already turned heavy enough to beat on the windows, the kind of weather that made paper curl and tempers rise. Ginny opened the door before Clarence could knock twice. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking exactly as he had when he handled Robert's estate. Measured, calm, pressed shirt in a shade of courthouse gray. A man built for understatement. Morning, Ginny, he said, stepping inside. The faint scent of his aftershave, cedar and ink, followed him. Morning, she returned. You've got it? He nodded, sliding a cream-colored envelope from his leather case. Fresh off the typewriter. Well, printer. Technically, but I prefer to think old-fashioned. Ginny smiled faintly. Of course you do. He set the papers on her dining table, careful not to wrinkle a single page. His gold pen gleamed against the header. Notice to vacate premises. 30 days. The words felt almost serene in their precision. Read it through, if you like, he said. It's all standard. Date, property description, signature line, no surprises. Ginny adjusted her reading glasses and scanned each line. Her name repeated in the document like a steady heartbeat. Madison's did not appear once. She liked that. Clarence leaned on the back of a chair. You sure you're ready to post it? Once this is served, the clock starts ticking. Ginny's gaze lingered on the bold print. 30 days. Yes, she said, voice steady. I'm done waiting for her to remember whose house this is. Clarence nodded, signing as witness while she scrawled her looping signature across the bottom. The pen scratched with satisfying finality. There, she said, exhaling. That's the sound of something setting right. He gathered his papers, tucking the duplicates neatly away. You've got backbone, Ginny. Don't let anyone paint you as the villain here. She almost laughed. "Oh, Clarence, I'm not the villain. I'm just the historian, making sure the record's correct." He gave a low chuckle, tapped his hat, and left her with the original copy on thick bond paper, the ink still drying. When the door closed, Ginny looked around the quiet house. The afternoon light hit the mantel just so, highlighting the empty space like an invitation. She folded the notice once, then again, then stopped, unfolding it carefully. The paper deserved better than to be creased. She thought of Carmen Doyle's shop down on King Street, gilt and grain, the scent of linseed oil and varnish, the walls lined with antique frames that gleamed like relics. Ginny slipped the eviction notice into a large envelope, grabbed her purse, and drove downtown. The little brass bell above Carmen's door jingled as she stepped inside. The shop was dim and cool, the air humming with the faint sound of an old ceiling fan. Carmen emerged from behind the counter, red lipstick perfectly in place, her linen apron streaked with gold dust. "Well, if it isn't Ginny Foster," she said warmly. "Haven't seen you since you framed those anniversary photos. How's retirement treating you?" Ginny smiled, polite but distracted. "Productive. Lately." Carmen wiped her hands on a cloth. "What are we framing today?" Ginny laid the document on the counter. The bold heading caught the light. Carmen's brows arched. "Framing legal papers?" she said, a half laugh in her voice. "That's a new one." Ginny's reply was quiet, deliberate. "Oh, it's going on the mantel." Carmen studied her for a long moment, then nodded as though she'd just recognized the tone of someone past negotiation. She led Ginny to a row of frames hung like museum pieces. "This one," Ginny said, pointing. "Deep walnut, gold inlay, the same dimensions as her wedding photo had been." Carmen tilted her head. "That's a bold choice. Heavy frame for heavy news." "It deserves weight," Ginny said simply. When the job ticket was written, Carmen promised to have it ready in an hour. Ginny spent the time next door at the cafe, sipping unsweet tea and watching the courthouse clock strike noon. She felt strangely calm, as if something old and restless inside her had finally found rhythm. By afternoon, she was back home. She removed the notice from its protective wrap, now sealed beneath glass, the gold inlay catching every glint of light. She carried it to the living room, centered it carefully on the mantel. The bold letters stared back. 30 days to vacate. The phrase looked almost elegant framed there, formal and unyielding. The house seemed to settle, as though relieved to see its truth displayed again. Ginny stepped back, folded her arms, and studied her work. "Perfect," she murmured. Through the wall, she could hear Madison laughing again, careless, unaware. Ginny smiled thinly. "Laugh while you can." Then she turned off the lights and let the room go dim, the gold frame glowing faintly in the dusk like a promise carved in law. By late morning, the house was too quiet. Even the cicadas outside seemed to pause, as though waiting for the next act. Ginny sat in the parlor, her tea untouched, eyes fixed on the gold-framed eviction notice gleaming softly in the muted light. It looked regal there, unbothered, immovable, as if it had always belonged. The sound came first, footsteps, sharp and uneven, moving fast from the other side of the duplex. Then a door slammed. Madison appeared in the doorway, clutching the frame, her manicured fingers smudging the glass. Her face was flushed, mouth twisted into disbelief. "This," she hissed, holding it out like something contaminated, "has to be a joke, right?" Ginny rose slowly, smoothing her skirt. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Like tossing a photo in the trash?" For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The house seemed to hold its breath. Madison's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. You're actually evicting us? Your own son?" Ginny's tone stayed even, almost polite. "I'm evicting tenants who've forgotten whose name is on the deed." Madison's laugh came out jagged and ugly. This is insane. You can't just… Actually, Ginny cut in, her voice like fine glass. I can. That did it. Madison's composure cracked. She slammed the frame against the table, not hard enough to break it, but enough to rattle the silverware in the drawer. You're a bitter, lonely old woman, she spat. Do you really think you can scare me with some piece of paper? Ginny took a step forward. It's not fear I'm after, Madison, just peace. Peace? Madison scoffed. You'll get plenty of that when this house is mine one day. Ginny smiled then, small, sharp, unflinching. You might want to check the will before you redecorate. Madison's face flushed deeper, her hands trembling around the frame. For a flicker of a second, Ginny thought she might throw it. But Madison caught herself, lips tightening into something more calculated. Fine, she said, voice rising. You want war? You've got it. I'll call a lawyer. I'll call everyone. You'll regret this. She spun on her heel, storming toward the door. Ginny didn't stop her. Brian was standing in the foyer, shoulders slumped, hands jammed into his pockets, the guilt practically radiating off him. He looked between them, helpless. Brian, Madison barked, say something. Tell her she can't do this. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. Mom, maybe we should just… Don't you dare, Madison snapped. You take her side. You're sleeping in your truck. Ginny met her son's eyes. You don't have to choose sides, Brian. Just pack your things. That seemed to deflate him completely. He nodded once, eyes lowered, and Madison stormed out the door, her sandals slapping hard against the porch. The SUV engine roared to life seconds later, then peeled away down Magnolia Street. The silence that followed was profound. Brian lingered by the doorway for a moment, staring at the floor like a child waiting for detention to end. She shouldn't have touched your photo, he said softly. I told her it was wrong. Ginny turned toward the mantel. You didn't stop her? He flinched, then nodded. I know. Without another word, he left, his footsteps fading down the hall, leaving her alone with the ticking clock and the faint smell of humidity seeping through the open window. Ginny exhaled and walked to the hall closet. Inside, a few old boxes sat stacked neatly, untouched relics Madison hadn't gotten around to refreshing. She pulled one down and lifted the lid. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue, were Robert's medals, his folded flag, and a photo of him in uniform, young and steady-eyed. One by one, she carried them back to the mantel. The medals went first, polished to a soft shine. Then the photo. Then the flag, folded tight and perfect. The framed notice remained at the center, glowing beneath the lamplight, law and legacy side by side. When the mantel was complete again, Ginny stepped back and surveyed it, arms folded. The arrangement was solemn, almost ceremonial. Through the window, she could see Marla's silhouette next door, leaning against her porch rail with a cup of coffee. Ginny lifted her chin slightly in greeting. Marla raised her mug in silent approval. For the first time in weeks, the house felt balanced, until the phone rang. Ginny frowned, crossing the room. The caller ID was unknown, local number. She picked up. Mrs. Virginia Foster? A clipped voice asked. This is Officer Denton with the Charleston Police Department. I'm calling to inform you that Madison Foster has filed a temporary restraining order against you, citing allegations of harassment and elder abuse. Ginny's grip on the receiver tightened, the blood draining from her face. Elder abuse? Yes, ma'am. You'll receive the paperwork by tomorrow. Until then, we advise no contact. When the call ended, Ginny stood still, the hum of the dial tone lingering in her ear like static. The house was quiet again. But this time, the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like the first rumble before a storm. She looked toward the mantel, at the frame, the medals, the photo. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "So that's how she wants to play it." The envelope arrived 2 mornings later, thick, official, and far too heavy for paper. Ginny found it wedged in her screen door, the Charleston humidity already curling its corners. The seal of the county courthouse glared up at her like a challenge. She carried it to the kitchen table and slid it open with the same paring knife she used to peel apples. Inside, the words were brutal in their simplicity. Summons. Temporary restraining order hearing. Plaintiff, Madison Foster. Defendant, Virginia Foster. Ginny read it twice before the meaning fully settled. Harassment, elder abuse. Psychological intimidation. Her hands went cold. She had taught hundreds of teenagers over her career. Some of them cruel, some manipulative. But even they hadn't been this audacious. She set the papers down, steadying her breathing, and reached for the phone. "Marla," she said when her friend answered, "you'd better come over." Marla arrived in slippers, still holding her morning mug. She scanned the pages with a scowl deep enough to leave lines. "This is pure fiction," she said flatly. "She's got you calling her names, banging on her walls, stealing her mail. It reads like a bad soap opera." Ginny's lips tightened. She wants a record, something she can wave around before she's out of this house. Marla's expression softened only slightly. "She's playing with fire, Ginny. Judges don't like this kind of nonsense." "I know." Marla poured them both coffee. "Clarence will eat this alive. Call him." Clarence didn't even wait for her to finish reading the first paragraph over the phone. "I've seen this move before," he said. "Family feuds dressed up as legal emergencies. Judges don't take kindly to false filings, especially ones that waste docket time." Ginny could hear papers shuffling on his end, the brisk click of a pen. "Send me copies," he added. "We'll file a response today. In the meantime, keep calm. Don't give her the satisfaction of a reaction." Ginny glanced toward the window. Madison's car sat smugly in the drive. The curtains on that side were drawn. "Calm," Ginny repeated, her tone razor thin. That's one thing she won't recognize. By that afternoon, Ginny had a new routine: gather proof. She walked down Magnolia Street with a small notebook, knocking on familiar doors. Mrs. Reeves from across the way signed a statement immediately. "I've seen how that young woman talks to you, Virginia, like your hired help." Trudy from church agreed, offering not only her signature but a tray of brownies. "If anyone's been abused, honey, it's you." Even Carmen Doyle from the frame shop insisted on writing her part in careful cursive. "That daughter-in-law of yours?" She ordered a custom frame, then complained about old people prices. "I'd testify any day." By evening, Ginny had a neat stack of written testimonies, each one folded with the precision of an affidavit. She placed them inside a manila folder, labeling it in block letters, "Truth." The folder sat beside the eviction notice on her desk, both framed in the soft lamplight. The hearing came quickly. A Tuesday morning, sky overcast, courthouse marble slick from coastal drizzle. Ginny wore navy, the same suit she'd worn to Robert's memorial service, and pinned his small lapel medal just beneath her collar. Clarence met her at the courthouse steps, calm as ever, umbrella in hand. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and air conditioning. Madison sat at the opposite table in a pristine white dress, hair styled within an inch of vanity. Brian was beside her, eyes glassy, hands clenched. When the judge entered, the room hushed. Madison's attorney began his speech, dramatic, heavy on adjectives: manipulative mother-in-law, toxic environment, emotional distress. Ginny said nothing. Clarence simply stood, waited for the monologue to run out of air, then stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "the defense submits 15 written statements from neighbors, church members, and business owners, all attesting to Mrs. Foster's conduct. Not a single witness supports these allegations. He let the silence do the work. The judge skimmed the papers, his expression unreadable, then turned to Madison. Mrs. Foster, do you have any corroborating evidence? Madison blinked, caught off guard. I, well, she's controlling. The judge raised a hand. That's not evidence, ma'am. That's opinion. He stacked the papers neatly, looked at Ginny, then back at Madison. Case dismissed. Temporary order dissolved. The gavel struck once. Ginny didn't move, didn't smile. She only gathered her papers, slid them back into the folder, and turned toward the door. As she passed Madison, their eyes met, one woman shaking with outrage, the other carved from calm stone. 30 days, Ginny said softly. You're wasting them. Madison's lips parted, but no sound came out. Outside, the air was sharp with rain. Marla was waiting on the courthouse steps with an umbrella and a grin wide enough to rival judgment itself. Well? She asked. Ginny handed her the folder marked Truth. Dismissed in minutes. Marla's laugh echoed down the wet street. Didn't I tell you? Judges hate bad fiction. Ginny allowed herself a small, tired smile. The courthouse clock tolled above them, slow and deliberate. She looked toward the darkening clouds. Then it's time for the next chapter. By the end of the week, the rain had cleared, leaving Charleston washed and shining like a city reborn. Ginny's nerves had quieted into something steadier, a calm forged in paperwork, patience, and quiet resolve. When Clarence called that morning, his tone carried a faint note of triumph. Filed and stamped, he said. The eviction is now official. You can post the notice whenever you're ready. Ready, Ginny replied without hesitation. She hung up, pulled a crisp envelope from her desk, and slid the newly signed documents inside a transparent laminated sleeve. It looked almost ceremonial, legal scripture sealed against the world's weather and excuses. Outside, the air smelled of cut grass and honeysuckle. The sun broke through the magnolia branches, glinting off the brass number plate on her gate. Ginny crossed the lawn with the laminated notice tucked under one arm, her other hand steadying a roll of tape. Madison's side of the duplex was still, curtains drawn, but she could hear the faint hum of a hairdryer through the window. She paused, positioned the notice squarely on the center of the front door, and pressed the tape along each edge with clinical precision. It gleamed in the sunlight, official, undeniable. The sound of the door opening came fast. Madison froze in the doorway, her blow-dried hair haloed in the morning light, a robe cinched tight around her. Her gaze darted from the paper to Ginny, disbelief twisting into fury. What is this? She demanded, snatching at the laminated page. Ginny didn't flinch. It's the part where I stop asking nicely. Madison stared down at the bold header, Final Eviction Notice, as though reading a foreign language. You laminated it? She shrieked, incredulous. Ginny met her glare evenly. Rain's been unpredictable lately. Across the street, a screen door creaked. Marla had stepped onto her porch, coffee in hand, trying and failing to hide her smirk. Madison's voice climbed higher, sharp enough to cut air. You can't just post this like some public humiliation. Brian! The shout echoed through the house. A moment later, Brian appeared behind her, hair rumpled, holding a half-packed box. His expression was heavy with the exhaustion of someone who'd already surrendered. Madison, he started, his voice low. Maybe we should just start packing. Madison spun on him. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side that owns the property, he said quietly. Ginny turned without waiting for the rest, walking back across the grass with a composure that made Madison's fury look childish. The shrieks behind her blurred into meaningless sound, vowels thrown like stones that couldn't reach her anymore. Inside, the air felt cool and deliberate. She set a vinyl record on the turntable, Robert's favorite kind of blue, and dropped the needle. The first notes of Miles Davis drifted through the house, steady, blue, timeless. Ginny settled into her chair by the window, tea steaming beside her, eyes half closed as the trumpet filled the quiet. Outside, she could hear the dull thump of boxes being set down, the drag of cardboard against wood floors. The sound was beautiful. By the time the second track began, the familiar chime of the doorbell broke the rhythm. Ginny rose, crossed the foyer, and opened the door to find Carmen Doyle standing there with a paper bag under her arm and that ever-knowing grin. "Thought you might need this," Carmen said, holding out another walnut frame, identical to the one on the mantel. The gold inlay caught the sunlight, warm and defiant. Ginny raised an eyebrow. "You're spoiling me." "Insurance," Carmen said, "in case the current decor decides to walk off again." Ginny's smile was small, genuine. "You always did know my taste." Carmen tipped her chin toward the muffled chaos next door. "Sounds like progress." Ginny nodded. "Sounds like justice." They stood in easy silence for a moment, listening to the quiet jazz inside, the distant rattle of packing outside. When Carmen left, Ginny placed the new frame beside the mantel, empty for now, but waiting. The glass gleamed like a promise. She poured herself another cup of tea and returned to her chair, Miles's trumpet easing back into the room like memory. Through the window, she caught sight of Madison on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp, desperate, carrying across the yard. Ginny turned the volume up, letting the music swallow the noise. By Monday morning, the quiet was gone. Ginny first noticed it when her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from neighbors, former colleagues, even a woman she hadn't spoken to since her teaching days at Westbrook High. Each message started the same way. "Ginny, have you seen what Madison posted?" Ginny set down her teacup, heart steady, not startled but unsurprised. She opened her laptop, clicked the link one of them had sent, and there it was. A polished tragedy crafted in pastel filters. A photo of Madison standing on her porch, eyes puffy but makeup perfect. The caption read, "When your elderly landlord, your own mother-in-law, decides you're not good enough to live in the house you've helped care for, I've been silent long enough. This is elder abuse and intimidation, and I won't be bullied anymore." Below it, a carousel of pictures, boxes stacked neatly, Brian's tired face half in frame, the laminated eviction notice gleaming in the background like an accusation. Ginny scrolled, expression blank but jaw tight. Dozens of comments had already flooded in. "That's disgusting. I'd sue her. No compassion these days." Someone had tagged a tenants' rights group. Another posted crying emojis. Madison had replied to each one with strategic humility. "Thank you for understanding. This has been so hard on us." Ginny exhaled slowly through her nose, the way she used to before scolding students caught cheating. Then, with a steadiness that could only come from decades of documentation, she began to take screenshots. Every comment, every photo, every revision of the post. Click, save, click, save. Her fingers moved like clockwork. By afternoon, she had a folder titled Defamation, Digital Evidence. The first knock came just after lunch. Marla didn't bother waiting for an invitation. She strode in holding her tablet like a weapon. "Seen it?" she asked. "I've seen it. She's turned this town's Facebook group into a courtroom." "Good thing," Ginny said. "I still believe in real ones." Marla smirked. "Clarence will have a field day with this." Ginny nodded toward the mantel where the framed eviction notice still glowed against the light. "She can post all she wants. Paper still outranks pixels." The next day, a manila envelope arrived. Not from the courthouse this time, but from the Charleston Daily Chronicle. Inside was a short, typed letter from a reporter named Owen Kelter. "Ms. Foster, we've received public claims involving you and your family property. I'd appreciate a brief comment for accuracy before publishing anything further. I'd prefer to hear your side directly. Ginny read the letter twice, then smiled faintly. Finally, someone still valued fact over performance. She picked up the phone and called Clarence. Would a notarized statement be enough? Perfect, he said. Keep it short, keep it factual, and for heaven's sake, don't let them quote you out of anger. Ginny chuckled. Anger doesn't quote well anyway. That afternoon, she sat at her desk and drafted 3 sentences in her precise, looping handwriting. The property in question is solely owned by me, Virginia Foster. Proper legal notice was served in accordance with state law. I harbor no ill will, only an expectation of respect within my own home. She had it notarized at the bank downtown and sent it by courier to the newspaper. Nothing more. Nothing less. By midweek, the town had shifted tone. Trudy, the church treasurer, showed up on Ginny's porch with a covered casserole and a sympathetic smile. You know how people are, she said, setting the dish down. They see a pretty face crying online and think that's gospel. But this town remembers who brought the choir coffee every Sunday for 20 years. Ginny laughed softly. And who fixed the leaking roof on the church office, too. Trudy nodded, eyes glinting. Exactly. Folks around here know who's who. Give it a few days. That post'll rot faster than banana pudding left in the sun. After she left, Ginny peeked out the window at the other side of the duplex. Madison's curtains were half drawn, her phone glued to her hand. That night, Ginny poured herself a glass of sherry and sat by the window. The magnolia trees outside shimmered under the porch light. She opened her laptop again. Madison's post was still up, but the comments had changed. The tone had curdled. Didn't you admit you weren't paying rent? Funny how that elderly abuser was the one paying your utilities. This story's missing something. Madison had stopped replying. Ginny's lips curved into something faintly resembling satisfaction, not gloating, just recognition that truth, given air, could still breathe. She closed the laptop, leaned back, and let Miles Davis fill the room again. The slow trumpet felt softer tonight, almost like relief. Then, her phone buzzed. A new notification. Local Chronicle. Update. Foster family dispute. Misrepresented, says attorney Clarence Monroe. Ginny smiled into the glow of the screen, but her satisfaction froze when another message appeared beneath it, a text from Brian. Mom, we need to talk. Madison's not backing down. She's planning something big. The record hissed softly as the trumpet faded out. Ginny's reflection in the window stared back, calm, deliberate, and ready. The courthouse always smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, like too many endings had been wiped down and stacked neatly in its corners. Ginny sat in the second row, her hands folded over her purse. The same quiet composure she'd worn through decades of parent-teacher conferences now armor against something much pettier. Across the aisle, Madison dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that still bore the folds of its packaging. The performance was flawless, subdued makeup, muted dress, one hand resting protectively against her stomach as though the word hardship needed a prop. Brian sat beside her, shoulders caved in, wedding band glinting whenever he rubbed his hands together. He looked like a man trying to vanish. The clerk called the case. Foster v. Foster. Motion for extension. Ginny stood with Clarence at her side. He adjusted his glasses, briefcase neatly squared on the table, every movement deliberate. Madison's attorney, a younger man with expensive shoes and the moral spine of a paperclip, rose first. Your Honor, my client is requesting a 60-day extension on the court-ordered eviction. She has recently been under significant emotional and physical strain due to this family conflict. The hardship of relocating so soon would be detrimental to her health. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a face carved from impatience, glanced at the paperwork. And what medical documentation supports this claim? Madison shifted in her seat, color rising to her cheeks. Well, it's more emotional, really. Anxiety, sleeplessness. So, the judge said flatly, nothing from a physician? The attorney stammered. Not yet, Your Honor, but... Noted. Clarence stepped forward, voice even, words honed sharp. Your Honor, Mrs. Foster, he gestured to Ginny, served legal notice 41 days ago, well beyond the 30-day requirement. We have timestamps, certified delivery receipts, and a notarized statement verifying she offered her daughter-in-law ample time to vacate. Additionally, he opened a folder with a practiced flick. We have digital exhibits of social media posts made by the plaintiff during this same period, claiming ownership and continued occupancy, in direct contradiction of her assertion of hardship. The judge leaned forward, scanning the screenshots Ginny had compiled, the smiling photos, the captions dripping with entitlement. I see, she said, closing the folder. Mrs. Foster, do you have anything further to add? Ginny met the judge's gaze steadily. Only that I've been more patient than necessary, Your Honor. I've been called cruel for wanting peace in my own home. I don't wish her harm. Just distance. The courtroom was silent for a long moment, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then the judge nodded once. Request for 60-day extension is denied. You have 10 days to vacate the premises. Court is adjourned. The gavel's crack was softer than Ginny expected. Madison's jaw dropped. 10 days? She whispered, half to herself, half to the universe. You can't. The judge was already gone. Brian turned to her, voice low and cracked. Just let it go, Mads. We'll figure something out. Madison rounded on him, eyes wild. She started this. Ginny didn't look back. She gathered her purse, nodded once to Clarence, and walked out the double doors into the noon light. Outside, the heat hit her like applause. The courthouse steps gleamed with rain left from last night's storm, sunlight catching in every puddle. She paused at the top, breathing in the thick air of Charleston, the salt, the magnolia, the faint trace of diesel from the street below. Behind her, through the heavy doors, she could still hear Madison's voice, shrill, splintering, desperate. But it no longer reached her. Clarence joined her, holding out the stamped ruling. Official copy for your records. Ginny took it carefully, the embossed seal pressing cool against her fingertips. Thank you, Clarence. You handled yourself beautifully, he said. I'll see to the filing. She nodded, then began down the courthouse steps, her heels tapping a rhythm that sounded like closure. Halfway to her car, her phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed Carmen Doyle. Ginny smiled before answering. Carmen. Just saw the Chronicle update, Carmen said, voice bright with mischief. So you finally got your ruling. Huh? 10 days, Ginny said. It's over. Carmen laughed softly. Over? Honey, I think it deserves a little ceremony. Ginny raised an eyebrow, already sensing the grin on the other end of the line. What kind of ceremony? The framing kind, Carmen said. Want me to make room for a final ruling beside the eviction notice? Ginny's smile deepened, a glint in her eyes no one at the courthouse had seen. You know me too well. As she ended the call, she slipped the ruling into her bag and looked up at the courthouse clock tower, its bronze hands gleaming in the sunlight. For the first time in months, she felt the ground beneath her steady and sure. Charleston's late afternoon light was merciless, bright, bare, and gold enough to make every shadow look deliberate. Ginny pulled into a narrow space outside Gilt and Grain, Carmen Doyle's frame shop, the courthouse seal still folded carefully inside her bag. The bell above the door chimed softly when she stepped in. The shop smelled of varnish and aged wood, the kind of air that hummed with patience. Carmen was behind the counter, bent over a workbench with a pair of magnifying glasses perched on her nose. Well, if it isn't my favorite regular, she said without looking up. I've been expecting you. Ginny smiled faintly. Word travels fast. In this town? Faster than common sense. Carmen straightened, wiping her hands on a linen cloth. So, tell me, do you want something that says closure or something that says lesson learned? Ginny pulled the folded ruling from her purse, smoothing it across the counter. The paper caught the light, its embossed seal shining like a final verdict. Something that doesn't invite forgiveness. Carmen studied her for a moment, then turned toward the back wall. I think I've got just the thing. She returned carrying a frame unlike any Ginny had ever chosen before. It was modern, matte black with razor-straight edges, cold and clean, no filigree, no warmth, just formality and weight. This one doesn't forgive, Carmen said simply. Ginny traced the edge with her fingertip. Perfect. They worked in silence while Carmen measured, cut, and sealed the glass. The shop filled with the muted sounds of her tools, the snip of the mat board, the soft thud of the backing sliding into place. When Carmen was done, she held it up for inspection. The court order sat inside, stark against the white matting, the Charleston County seal gleaming like quiet authority. Ginny's reflection stared back from the glass, lined, steady, unshaken. It looks, Ginny began, then paused, searching for the word. Final, Carmen offered. Ginny nodded. Yes, final. She paid in cash, ignoring Carmen's offer to carry it out. The frame wasn't heavy, but it had presence. Back home, the house greeted her with its familiar stillness, the kind that used to sting, but now felt earned. The faint hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound. She didn't go to the living room. Not this time. Instead, she walked to the hallway that led to Madison's old side of the duplex, the one Madison had once called her aesthetic zone. The shelves along the wall were mostly empty now, save for a few stubborn traces of Madison's touch, tiny nail holes from fake eucalyptus wreaths, a forgotten command hook, the faint outline where a mirror used to hang. Ginny stood for a moment, remembering the pastel clutter that used to fill the space. Then, with the precision of a curator restoring order to a gallery, she centered the new frame on the middle shelf. The matte black border looked almost severe against the cream wall. It commanded attention without apology. The words within, final court ruling, motion denied, 10 days to vacate, sat bold and still, their authority sealed in glass. Ginny stepped back. The house seemed to shift with it, the air heavier, more settled. She pulled out her phone, adjusted the angle, and took a single photo, clear, well-lit, time-stamped, documentation, proof that justice could indeed be aesthetic. The photo captured more than she expected, the glint of the court seal, the faint reflection of her face. And just at the edge, the mantel in the distance, where the first frame, the eviction notice, still stood sentinel. 2 frames now, 2 monuments to boundaries reclaimed. Ginny lowered the phone and exhaled slowly. The breath came out steady, controlled, but somewhere in the quiet, she could hear the faintest echo of her husband's voice. Robert's calm reassurance, the one he'd always used when she doubted herself. You've done right, Gin. She carried that thought to the kitchen, where she set water to boil. The kettle whistled its sharp approval minutes later. As she poured the tea, the house creaked, a familiar groan from the old floorboards by the guest room. Wind, probably. Or settling. Still, Ginny glanced toward the hall. The shadows seemed deeper than they should have been. She took her cup and sat at the table, facing the direction of the new frame. The matte black border caught a glint of light from the window, an accidental reflection that made it gleam briefly, like something alive. Ginny sipped her tea, her eyes on that flicker of movement. It faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the words behind glass, calm and unmovable. For the first time in months, she felt the quiet settle around her like protection, until her phone buzzed again. A new message. No name attached. Just a local number. You think this is over? Ginny stared at the screen, the tea cooling between her hands. Her gaze drifted back to the hallway, to the black frame gleaming darkly in the light. The knock came just as the sun dipped low, painting the porch in burnt gold. Ginny had been expecting it, not because Brian had the courage to confront her, but because Madison's silence had finally run out of places to echo. She opened the door to find her son standing on the step, hands shoved deep in his pockets, face pale beneath the Charleston humidity. The same defeated slope to his shoulders, the same hollow around his eyes that she'd seen since the wedding day, he'd pretended was all his idea. "Mom," he started, voice cracking just slightly. "Can we talk?" Ginny hesitated only a beat before stepping aside. 5 minutes. He came in without meeting her eyes, his gaze landing almost immediately on the new frame in the hallway. The matte black gleamed faintly under the lamp, cold and undeniable. He exhaled like it had winded him. "She got that text message to you too, didn't she?" Ginny asked, tone neutral. Brian's brow furrowed. "What text?" Ginny's stomach tightened. So Madison hadn't shared that little escalation. Interesting. She crossed her arms, leaning lightly against the doorframe. "Then why are you here?" He turned to her, frustration and exhaustion bleeding together. "Because this..." He gestured toward the frame, the house, the empty quiet. "This isn't right." "She was wrong, I know that. But can't we fix this before it gets worse?" Ginny's voice was calm, steady as still water. "You watched her disrespect me for years, Brian. There were 1,000 chances to fix this. You didn't take any of them." He flinched, the words landing hard. "You think I didn't notice? You think it was easy being stuck between you two?" "I think it was easy enough for you to stay comfortable while she threw away pieces of me," Ginny replied. "Comfort doesn't make a man blind, but it does make him quiet." Brian looked away, jaw tightening. Dad wouldn't have wanted this. The air in the room shifted. Ginny's breath hitched, small, sharp, but she didn't look away. "Don't," she said softly. He blinked. "What?" Her voice rose, just enough to slice through the stillness. "Don't you dare speak for a man who defended me with silence." For a moment, everything stopped. The clock on the mantel, the hum of the fan, the distant drone of cicadas. The words hung there, thick and heavy, and Ginny saw the truth settle across her son's face like a shadow. He looked suddenly smaller, no longer the boy who used to run barefoot through the garden, just a man who'd never learned how to choose. "I'm sorry," he murmured, eyes fixed on the floor. "You're not sorry," she said, softer now but no less sure. "You're scared. Scared that for once your mother won't take the blame to keep the peace." He swallowed hard, still refusing to look up. "She's packing," he said finally. "We'll be gone in a few days." Ginny nodded. 10, to be exact. He started to say something else. Maybe an apology, maybe another plea. But she stepped past him, walked to the door, and opened it wide. The evening air swept in, thick with the scent of magnolia and the faint sound of a neighbor's wind chimes. Brian hesitated on the threshold, his shoulders slumped like a man walking away from something sacred he'd never understood. He turned once, his voice small. "Mom. She's not the only one losing something here." Ginny's hand tightened on the doorknob. "Then maybe it's time you learned what losing feels like." For a second, he looked as though he might say more. But then he nodded, defeated, wordless, and stepped out into the fading light. She watched him walk down the path toward the driveway, his silhouette framed by the last of the sunset. He didn't look back. When she closed the door, it was with deliberate care. The latch clicked softly, final and clean. She turned the lock. No grief came. No ache, no tremor. Just a stillness she could finally claim as her own. In the silence, the frames down the hallway caught the dim light, their glass faces reflecting twin streaks of gold, one warm, one cold. Ginny walked past them both, the sound of her steps even and sure. Then her phone buzzed again on the counter. Another message from that same local number. "You'll regret this. She's not done." Ginny stared at it for a long time, then set the phone face down. The kettle began to whistle behind her. Sharp and rising. The morning they left, Charleston woke in soft fog. A gray veil over the street that seemed to hush everything but the scrape of boxes against concrete. From her porch, Ginny could hear every sound, the thud of footsteps, the clatter of furniture disassembled too quickly, the brittle edge of Madison's voice slicing through the humid air. She didn't step down from the porch. She just stood there, arms crossed, the faint breeze lifting a loose strand of her silver hair. Her tea sat cooling on the railing beside her. Brian carried most of the boxes. He moved slowly, head down, sweat darkening the back of his collar. Madison didn't lift a thing heavier than her purse. She stood by the open SUV, directing him with clipped instructions, each one a little louder than necessary, as if volume might disguise defeat. "Careful with that. It's fragile." "You packed that wrong, Brian. God, do I have to do everything myself?" Ginny sipped her tea, unbothered. If Madison noticed her watching, she gave no sign. But when the last box was in the trunk and Brian closed it gently, Madison finally turned. Their eyes met. No words, no theatrics, just the brittle recognition of two women who would never understand each other. Madison's stare was venom wrapped in mascara, her jaw tight, her nostrils flared. She adjusted her sunglasses and said nothing, but the glare was louder than any insult. Ginny tilted her head, calm as a statue. "Drive safe," she said, voice soft enough that Madison had to read her lips. Madison blinked once, hard, and slid into the passenger seat without a word. Brian hesitated, hand on the driver's door, and looked up at his mother. His eyes were tired, not angry, just hollow. For a second, it looked like he might come up the porch steps. But then Madison's voice cut through the air from inside the car, sharp as ever. "Brian!" He flinched, nodded once to Ginny, and got in. The engine started. As the SUV rolled backward, Ginny caught a glimpse of Madison's reflection in the side mirror. One final glare, dark and deliberate. Then the car turned onto Magnolia Street and disappeared behind the curtain of fog. Ginny stayed there long after the sound of the engine faded. The silence that followed was so complete it almost rang in her ears. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. The scent of magnolia and salt water drifted through the air, clean and unspoiled. Inside, the house felt bigger, not emptier, just right-sized again. The kind of silence that didn't ache. The kind that felt earned. Ginny walked slowly through each room, her footsteps echoing lightly against the hardwood floors. The spaces Madison had filled with clutter now looked like they could breathe again. In the living room, the mantel waited. The frames stood side by side, the eviction notice in its warm walnut, the court ruling in its black severity. Between them, the faint outline still marked the spot where her wedding photo had once hung, the one Madison had thrown away. But Ginny had come prepared. She opened the drawer of her writing desk and pulled out a new photo, freshly printed, restored from an old digital scan she'd kept on a thumb drive for years. It wasn't perfect. The colors were softened by time, the details slightly blurred, but Robert's smile was unmistakable. So was hers. She slid the picture into a simple silver frame, not the same one Madison had destroyed, but close enough. Then she carried it to the mantel, setting it gently in the center. The moment she did, something in the air shifted. Sunlight broke through the fog outside, slanting through the window and landing right across the photo glass. Robert's face glowed faintly in the reflection. Ginny smiled, her eyes stinging just a little. "Welcome home," she whispered. The sound of a car pulling into the drive startled her. She turned, half expecting the return of bad ghosts. But it was Carmen's old Buick, gleaming in the sunlight like a cheerful interruption. Carmen stepped out holding a paper bag in one hand and a bottle of champagne in the other. "I brought bubbles," she announced, striding up the porch steps. "Because good riddance deserves proper fizz." Ginny laughed, a real, full laugh that surprised her. "You didn't have to." "Didn't have to." "Honey, I've been waiting weeks for this show to end." Carmen swept inside like she owned the place and spotted the wedding photo immediately. Her hand went to her chest. "Well, would you look at that? You finally brought him back." Ginny's voice softened. "Took me long enough." Carmen pulled 2 crystal flutes from her bag. "Then let's toast to taking your house back." Frame by frame. The cork popped, echoing through the quiet like a punctuation mark at the end of a long sentence. They poured, clinked glasses, and sat on the couch facing the mantel. For the first time in months, Ginny felt the peace she'd been chasing, solid, simple, unbreakable. She sipped her champagne, eyes on the photo. The light on the glass shifted again, and for a heartbeat, it almost looked like Robert was smiling right at her. Carmen sighed beside her. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Ginny nodded, slow and sure. "It feels mine." The 2 women sat there in companionable silence as the house finally exhaled. Then, from somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Hard. Carmen glanced toward the window. "You expecting anyone?" Ginny set her glass down, the piece in her chest tightening into something sharper. "No," she said quietly. "Not anymore." The peace lasted 3 days. On the 4th, a thick envelope arrived by courier. Cream cardstock, embossed return address from a Charleston law firm Ginny didn't recognize. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, weighted not by paper, but by audacity. She slid it open with her letter opener and read the heading: Civil Complaint, Madison Foster versus Virginia Foster, Allegations, Defamation, Unlawful Eviction, Emotional Distress, and Intentional Infliction of Harm. Ginny stared at the words for a long moment, then quietly muttered, "She really doesn't know when to stop." At Clarence Monroe's office the next morning, the blinds were half drawn against the late summer glare. His desk was neat as ever, legal pads stacked like scripture, fountain pen gleaming beside a cup of black coffee. He scanned the complaint, lips twitching once before curling into a dry chuckle. "She's suing you," he said flatly, "for obeying a court order she lost." Ginny allowed herself a small, humorless smile. Consistency has never been her strength. Clarence flipped another page, shaking his head. "Claims emotional trauma, reputational harm, and," he squinted, "irreparable psychological distress from being removed from a generational property." "That property," Ginny said evenly, "has had 1 generation on the deed. Mine." Clarence looked up, grin tugging at his mustache. "I'd like to frame this nonsense myself." "I already have a wall for that," she replied. Over the next week, Clarence built a defense that could have doubled as a lesson plan. Every email Madison had sent, the threats, the manipulative half-apologies, the passive-aggressive remarks about aging relatives and outdated decor, went into a neatly labeled folder. Ginny supplied everything: email threads, text screenshots, the notarized statements from neighbors, the church ladies' notes, Carmen's witness testimony from the frame shop. Even the screenshots of Madison's now-deleted social media post where she'd bragged about putting that woman in her place. Clarence laid it all out across the polished oak of his desk, humming faintly. "You've done half my job, Ginny. Remind me why you never went into law?" "I preferred teaching," she said. "At least students learn from consequences." The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. not because it was high profile, but because gossip in Charleston traveled faster than humidity. Marla, Carmen, and Trudy filled the back row like loyal spectators at a long-awaited game. Madison sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in mourning black, hair styled perfectly, eyes rimmed in soft pink, as though the very concept of heartbreak had been applied by makeup brush. Brian sat beside her, face blank, hands folded tight. Ginny didn't look at either of them. She only exchanged a calm nod with Clarence as he opened his briefcase. The judge, the same woman who had denied Madison's extension, glanced between them with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's make this quick, shall we?" Madison's new attorney began the show, all volume and no substance. "My client suffered months of psychological distress, humiliation, and the public erosion of her reputation." Clarence raised a hand. "Your Honor, we'll be brief." He opened a folder and slid forward a single stapled document. Exhibit A. Screenshots of the plaintiff's own posts maligning my client. Exhibit B. Her admission, online, that she paid no rent. Exhibit C. Witness statements, 16 of them, attesting to her mistreatment of Mrs. Foster and destruction of property, including a wedding photograph from 1974. Carmen's head tilted proudly in the back row as the judge flipped through the pages. Clarence continued, voice dry but steady. "And finally, Exhibit D, a copy of the previous court's ruling, affirming the eviction as lawful." The judge didn't even look up. "Mrs. Foster," she said, turning to Madison, "did you not already lose this matter last month?" Madison's attorney stammered. "We, believe new evidence?" "What evidence?" the judge asked, arching a brow. "Emotional hardship?" She sighed. "Court's time is not therapy." Clarence folded his hands neatly. "Your Honor, the defense requests a dismissal with prejudice." The judge didn't hesitate. "Granted, and," she added, glancing at Madison, "consider yourself lucky I'm only fining you for frivolous filing. $5,000 to the court, payable immediately." The gavel struck once, sharp and decisive. Outside, the sun was bright and merciless again. Carmen clapped Ginny on the shoulder as they stepped out of the courthouse. "Well, darling," she said, "I think that's what the young folks call poetic justice." Marla pulled a folded printout from her purse, the ruling already up on the small court database. "Got it downloaded and everything," she said proudly. "Thought I'd stick it on the fridge, right next to last year's pie contest ribbon." Ginny couldn't help a small laugh. "Frame it first," she said. Carmen grinned. "Of course you'd say that." They all laughed then. A real, unburdened sound that carried across the courthouse steps. But as the laughter faded, Ginny felt something quieter beneath it. Not triumph, not relief. Just closure. Clean, cold, necessary. She walked to her car, the courthouse seal gleaming faintly in her hand. The city around her was alive with ordinary noise, distant horns, the whisper of marsh wind, the faint hum of cicadas. But inside, something had gone still. That night, Ginny sat at her desk beneath the soft glow of her study lamp. The laughter of the day was gone, replaced by the quiet certainty of a decision she'd been circling for weeks. She opened her will, the original, typed and witnessed years ago, and began to revise. Her pen moved with careful precision as she crossed out two names, Brian Foster, Madison Foster. In their place, she wrote, "All property to be transferred to the Charleston Historical Preservation Trust in memory of Robert Foster, educator and veteran." She signed and dated it, her handwriting slow but sure. Then she slid the document into a new folder, labeled it neatly, and whispered into the silence, "No more chances." Outside, thunder rolled low over the marshes, a warning or a benediction, she couldn't tell. By mid-morning, the rain had finally cooled Charleston's August heat. The streets outside Clarence Monroe's office gleamed dark and wet, puddles catching glints of passing cars. Ginny sat in the leather chair across from his desk, the smell of paper, ink, and faint cigar smoke wrapping around her like an old memory. Clarence looked up from the new draft of her will, reading glasses low on his nose. "I'll say this much," he said, tapping the pages. "You've written cleaner prose than half the lawyers in this town. Are you absolutely certain about these changes?" Ginny folded her hands, calm and certain. "Every word." He studied her for a long moment, the rain pattering softly against the window behind him. "No room for revision?" "Not this time," she said. "Revisions are what got us here in the first place." Clarence gave a slow, approving nod, flipping the top page. "All right then. The house and property to the Charleston Historical Preservation Trust, to be maintained under your family's name and date of construction. Very generous. They'll be thrilled." "They'll take care of it," Ginny replied. "Better than my son ever did." Clarence's pen hovered over the signature line, but his tone gentled. "And the scholarship fund?" Ginny smiled faintly. "Robert always wanted his students to go further than he did. The least I can do is make sure a few of them get the chance." He read the clause aloud. "An annual scholarship in memory of Robert Foster, educator and veteran, for graduating seniors of Charleston High, pursuing history or public service." Ginny nodded once. He'd have liked that. Clarence leaned back in his chair, regarding her over the rims of his glasses. "And nothing for Brian or Madison." Her lips pressed into a line. "Nothing but time. They can make their own legacies with that." He didn't argue. He simply slid the papers across the desk, the soft rasp of parchment final and quiet. Ginny uncapped her pen, signed each line in her deliberate cursive, and dated the bottom corner. When she set the pen down, it was as if she'd exhaled a decade. Clarence stamped the final page with his seal, the sound echoing in the small office. "Well," he said, leaning back, "that's that." Ginny smiled. "That's everything." He handed her the signed copy, neatly bound and tucked in a manila folder. "You can rest easy now, Ginny." She stood, gathering her things. "Resting is overrated, but peace, that I'll take." By afternoon, the rain had given way to light. Ginny drove home under a sky rinsed clean, the clouds torn open to reveal long streaks of blue. The house stood waiting, dignified in its quiet. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and the faintest trace of the champagne Carmen had spilled days before. The mantel gleamed under the afternoon light. The 3 frames now aligned like milestones: the eviction notice, the court ruling, and her wedding photo restored to its rightful center. Ginny placed the folder gently on her desk, then retrieved a new frame from the bag she'd picked up that morning. Walnut again, but lighter this time, the gold edging softened by age. She opened the folder and removed the first page of her will, freshly notarized, her signature clean and certain. With steady hands, she placed it under glass, smoothing it once before closing the backing. The frame's weight felt different from the others. Heavier, but calm. She carried it to the mantel, setting it beside the wedding photo. The reflection of her face caught between her younger self and the new document. 2 bookends of a life fully claimed. The door opened behind her. "Lord, it's beautiful in here," Carmen said, stepping in without waiting for permission, as always. She carried a basket of scones wrapped in a linen towel. "I brought snacks. Thought you might be celebrating." Ginny smiled, not turning yet. "You always know when to show up." Carmen crossed the room and stopped when she saw the new frame. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she pressed a hand over her mouth. "Ginny," she whispered, eyes bright. "Is that what I think it is?" Ginny nodded. "Signed, sealed, and witnessed. The house goes to the trust. The money funds Robert's scholarship. Everything else goes where it belongs. Carmen's voice wavered. And not a cent for those two? Ginny's tone softened. Not cruel, just resolved. They've already taken more than I ever meant to give. Carmen blinked fast, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. You old steel-hearted saint, she said finally, laughing through it. Robert would be proud. Ginny's gaze lingered on the photo. He'd tell me it's about time. They stood there in companionable silence, the sunlight shifting slowly across the mantel. Carmen dabbed her eyes with a napkin, muttering, "If I ever need a will, you're writing it." Ginny chuckled, the sound warm and unburdened. You couldn't afford me. Carmen laughed again, then pulled her into a brief, tight hug. When she left, the house fell into stillness once more. The light from the window had softened to amber, catching the gold in the frame's trim. Ginny sat in her armchair with a cup of tea, staring at the line of frames across the room. They told her story better than words ever could. The betrayal, the justice, the reclamation. A low rumble of thunder rolled again over the marshes, distant but steady. She felt it more than heard it, like the world acknowledging her resolve. She reached out and touched the edge of the frame, cool, solid, real. Then her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A message. Unknown number. You can rewrite the paper, but you can't erase blood. Ginny's hand stilled on the frame. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, eyes unreadable. By the time the magnolias bloomed again, the house no longer felt haunted. It was early spring in Charleston, the kind of morning that smelled faintly of salt and jasmine. Sunlight spilled across Ginny's kitchen table, warming the screen of her laptop where an open article sat glowing. The Woman Who Reclaimed Her Home, a Charleston story of boundaries, family, and quiet justice. A reporter from the Chronicle had published it 2 days earlier, piecing together Ginny's story from public court filings and community interviews. She hadn't spoken to the press herself, not directly, but her notarized statement and the scholarship's public announcement had done most of the talking. Now, thousands of comments stretched beneath the article. What a woman! Wish I had half her grace. Protect your peace, Mrs. Foster. You earned it. This is how you handle disrespect, legally, calmly, permanently. Ginny scrolled slowly, her tea cooling beside her. She wasn't one for attention, but the kindness in those words hummed through her chest like a low, steady current. Outside, a delivery van idled at the curb. She rose and opened the door to find her porch blanketed in blooms, roses, lilies, hydrangeas, wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. Each bouquet came with a note. Thank you for reminding me it's okay to stand up for myself. You gave me courage to draw a line. There must have been 20 of them. Ginny laughed softly, shaking her head. Well, Robert, she murmured, seems I've gone viral. She carried one bouquet inside, the lilacs, her favorite, and placed them in a crystal vase by the window. The house smelled suddenly alive again. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from Trudy. You're gonna love this. And beneath it, a photo. A classroom full of Charleston High seniors clustered around a whiteboard. At the front, a poster read, The Robert Foster Memorial Scholarship. Our first recipient, Elise Jordan, class of 25. Trudy's text followed. Principal says the girl wants to teach history, just like him. Ginny stared at the photo until her vision blurred. The students in it were bright-faced, messy-haired, real. Life moving forward in the space Robert had left behind. She typed back slowly, Tell her I said congratulations, and that she's the start of something worth remembering. When she set the phone down, she noticed the light shifting in the room, softer now, golden against the mantel. There it was, the story of her life, told not in words but in frames. The eviction notice in warm walnut. the moment she took her home back. The court ruling in matte black. The proof that peace could be lawful. Her wedding photo. Love that outlasted the cruelty of someone who couldn't understand it. And now, the will. Her legacy. Sealed and unshakable. The afternoon breeze moved through the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of the lilacs and the hum of distant cicadas. Ginny moved through the house, touching the back of each chair, the cool brass handle of the kitchen drawer, the banister worn smooth by time. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a relic of her past. It felt inhabited. She paused before the mantel and ran her fingers along the edge of the silver wedding frame. Her reflection shimmered beside Robert's grin, 2 lives layered through time. "Something real, at last," she said softly. Then she reached for a small candle on the table, lavender and cedar, and struck a match. The flame caught quick, its light folding gently across the photos and documents that now defined her history. The shadows around the room softened. The air grew warm. Carmen had once told her that framing things was an act of defiance, a way to decide what stayed visible, what survived. Standing there now, Ginny understood that completely. Because this moment, this piece, was survival. She let the candle flicker, then picked up her teacup, breathing in the steam. The faintest sound reached her from outside. Children laughing down the street, a dog barking, the steady rhythm of a neighborhood restored to normalcy. The world had moved on, and finally, so had she. Ginny touched the corner of the wedding photo, the cool silver, the faint tremor of her own pulse beneath her fingertips, and exhaled. Her voice was quiet but sure, the final line of a story she had written herself. She threw away my memories, so I framed her eviction and made it part of mine.